Hello, everyone. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and this is one of our webinars. It's not one of our Tuesday evening webinars. It's one that we're doing in the morning because sometimes those have been quite successful and often get a different type of audience. But we're still doing the same things. We're discussing some of the big issues that face us in the 21st century. And one of the themes we've got running through this year is the whole future of democracy, how effective it is, whether it's in crisis and so on. And on February the 22nd, we've got a meeting in the House of Commons where we look at that. And the Parliamentary Outreach team are involved in that. They're going to talk about, how democracy can work in terms of the representative system. But today we've got Alasdair Mackenzie with us, who you can see here. I've just clicked, so he's there. Now, Alasdair is head of the Community Outreach team. He's a very user-friendly person, very good at engaging with people, which is great, which is fantastic for that job. And he's agreed to come on. He's helped us actually a lot with lots of things we do, and we've done things with him on Sustainable Development Goals, many others. He's really good that way. And he is going to come on and tell us about how we can make or try to make representative democracy work, how we can work with MPs, how we can work with select committees, all party parliamentary groups, and how we can do petitions. We've got Terry Lone, who's going to help us with the questions as well. You can see Terry, and he will come on when Alasdair's finished with me, and we'll take your questions that you put in your comments, and we'll put those to Alasdair. Alasdair's going to do a presentation. He will share his screen, and you will see a PowerPoint presentation. We'll record this, so you'll be able to see it after and disseminate it to whoever you want. Anyhow, Alasdair, thank you for joining us and for doing this. I'm going to go over to you now for you to do your presentation about making representative democracy work.
Thank you, Francis. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar, and thank you to Francis for organising it. This is only the second time I've done something like this, and I've found it to be really useful and a great way to reach out to people and talk to people who perhaps can't make it into Westminster or another venue where we usually hold our sessions. So I manage a team of staff who are based all around the UK, and we provide free training and workshops for the public on how to engage with Parliament and how to find out more about how to get their voice heard in Parliament. And so if any of you are interested after today's webinar at one of my team coming to talk to you where you live, then you can contact me via Francis. And as Francis says, we've also got an event coming up on February the 22nd, where my colleague Katrina Fleming will also be talking about how to get involved and how to get your voice heard in Parliament. The presentation I'm going to do this morning, usually we spend about an hour on this, and today we're going to try and get the main points into about 20-25 minutes. As Francis says, please do feel free to put some questions on the screen as I go, and then obviously afterwards we'll have a question and answer session so we can explore some of your questions in more detail. I am going to be using a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be dipping in and out of it because, as I say, it's designed for a longer session. And I really want to focus predominantly on the ways in which you can engage rather than spend a long time explaining the constitutional nature of Parliament and what it is. We can always discuss that in the Q&A if people have got questions. But really, I think what I'd like to focus on here is how you can have your say and get involved. I'm going to just start off just by drawing your attention to this at the bottom. This is a Twitter feed for not all of Parliament, but it's particularly focusing on the work we do to engage with the public. So if you want to follow and find out about the kind of events we run and the kind of public-facing work that we do, then please feel free. If you'd like to tweet about this webinar, then if you can use that that address, that would be really great, and then we can retweet it and let our followers know the work that we're doing. So just to explain who I am, obviously Francis has introduced me by name. I work for the Outreach and Engagement Service here in Parliament. It's a free service, so everything that we do, all the work we provide is free. And there's no charge, obviously, because we are funded by a taxpayer. It's an impartial service, so the work we do is really to explain the systems and try and help people get involved with those systems. We don't work for the government, we don't work for any political party, and we don't express political opinions. So during the Q&A session, please feel free to raise your opinions, but if you ask me directly what I think about Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn or Brexit, I'm afraid I can't discuss it. But I can certainly tell you how you could get your views across on these issues. And that's why we're here. We're here to help people get involved and play their part in the UK Parliament. So I'm not going to do all of these things today. We're not going to spend too much time on these first 2 points. we are going to zoom in on what MPs and members of the House of Lords do and talk about some of the ways you can get engaged. So as I say, I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail about the constitutional differences between the Commons and the Lords and the Queen. We can talk about that later if people have got questions. And similarly, I'm not going to spend a long time talking about the House of Commons. Suffice to say at this stage, it's the democratically elected chamber, and that everybody, wherever you live, you have an MP for your constituency, and they're there to represent you in Parliament. And that's true whether you voted for them or not. Even if you didn't vote, they're still your MP and they're there to represent you. The House of Lords, slightly different. Obviously, it's not an elected chamber, it's an appointed chamber. It spends a lot of its time looking at legislation, and it's got a really vital role at the moment because not only does the government not have a majority in the House of Commons, but it doesn't have a majority in the House of Lords either. So quite a lot of changes to legislation are going to be made in the House of Lords. And the government's going to have to think very carefully about what to do about those changes when bills return to the House of Commons. And it is known as the revising House very often, the House of Lords, because it spends so much time looking at legislation. About 800 members in the House of Lords, mainly appointed members. No overall party majority. Life peers, that's the majority of the members of the Lords, they're appointed. There are still about 92 hereditary peers, those are people who inherited their right to sit in the House of Lords. And there's about 26 bishops, or there are 26 bishops. It's an unusual feature of the House of Lords. It's to do with the nature of the monarch being the head of state as well as the head of Church of England. I think the most important thing to talk about from an engagement point of view, rather than a constitutional point of view with the bishops, is that they speak, they vote, they get involved in debates in the Lords, and you can write to them and contact them the same way you could any other member of the House of Lords. And then we have the monarch. The Queen's role is constitutional. So she's the head of state, she's politically neutral, she doesn't get involved in party politics. She does sign off laws passed by Parliament, giving them royal assent. No monarchs refused to do that since 1707. And she's there at the state opening to open Parliament, where she reads a speech, but obviously that speech is written for her. It's not written by her. So the Parliament's there to check and challenge the work of government. I think that's the most important thing to understand about Parliament. As I say, I'm not going to go massive detail about its status today, but I guess if you had one takeaway from this session, if someone asked you, what is Parliament, what's it there for? It is there to scrutinise, to check and challenge the work of government. It is not a branch of government. It's also the legislature of the UK, and it's a forum for debates on the important issues of the day. And of course, it has that function of approving government spending, which we see every year with the budget. So the government is party, usually with the majority of seats in the House of Commons. As we know at the moment, we don't have a majority government. Very important point to bear in mind. We don't have a majority government. There is no coalition government at the moment. This is not a government like David Cameron's government of 2010 to 2015, which was a formal coalition. It is an agreement that the Prime Minister has with the Democratic Unionist Party that they will support her on issues of confidence and supply. That means if there's a vote of confidence in the government, the DUP will support the government. If there's a vote about spending money or taxation, the DUP will support the government. Furthermore, the DUP have agreed they will support the government on issues to do with leaving the European Union. Any other policy the government wants to make a change to, any other kind of legislation, any other decision, the DUP are not bound to vote with the government. So this is a minority government. And the majority that Theresa May has, she only has for the issues that keep that government in power. And that's why people call it a confidence and supply arrangement. If the government doesn't have the confidence of the House, if the government can't pass a budget, it can't govern. So those are the kind of the bare minimum that you require as a Prime Minister to govern. The government then runs those different government departments like the Home Office, Transport, Health and so on. It proposes new laws to Parliament. So we have Parliament and we have government. Parliament, Westminster, government, Whitehall. Now, those are not official descriptions, they're just a shorthand, but it's how I tend to remember it, that Parliament is the Palace of Westminster, and most government departments are based in and around Whitehall. Government ministers do their work in Whitehall, and in Parliament, if you see a minister in Parliament, they're there to answer questions, to explain themselves to the Commons and the House of Lords. So we had an election last year. These are the results. Now, unfortunately, we don't have this in a handy sort of pie chart form, but you can see just looking at these numbers what we mean when we're talking about a minority government. You don't have to be a genius at maths to see if you add up all those other MPs outside of the Conservatives, then there are more MPs not Conservative than Conservative. Conservatives don't have an absolute majority. It's also the most diverse Parliament ever. So we have our first woman Sikh MP, Preet Gill. We have Layla Moran, the MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, who's the first MP of Palestinian descent. We have Marsha de Cordova in Battersea, who's registered blind. So we have a very, very diverse House of Commons. Having said that, we still don't have parity between women and men. So there are 208 women MPs out of 650. There are 52 BAME MPs, which is about a sixth of the House of Commons. It's a little bit off. I think it's about 10% nationally. The population is BAME, so it's not quite equal representation. And we have 45 LGBTQ MPs, which is the most LGBTQ MPs Commons has ever had. And we believe, although we can't prove it because not all parliaments collect these statistics, that we have a higher proportion of LGBTQ MPs than any other parliament or legislature in the world. And we also have 5 MPs with disabilities, and obviously that is quite a long way off the national average. So it's not wholly representative, but it is more diverse than any House of Commons has been. So this presentation, as you can see, was designed for the immediate wake of the election, but it still stands. There are many different ways you can get engaged and have your say. We're going to look at some of those now. You can campaign for a change in law or policy. One of the main ways you're going to do that is by communicating with your MP. We're going to look at how you do that in a moment. You may not realise you can also contact members of the House of Lords directly. You can contribute to select committee inquiries. So these don't just take evidence from big groups and organisations, they also take evidence from smaller groups and individual members of the public. And you can just simply follow what's going on. You can read Hansard online, you can attend discussions and sessions like this one, you can watch the debates that take place through Parliament TV. I'll show you how you can do those things in a moment. And of course there's voting. If you haven't registered to vote, please make sure you do so. It is now a question of registering individually. Once upon a time, each household would have a form for registration. Now you have to vote individually, register to vote individually. So do make sure, if you haven't done that, make sure you do. And the way to do that is to get in touch with your local authority, have a look at their website or contact them over the phone, and they'll be able to tell you how you can register to vote. So I'm going to skip this and just move on to some of the different things that you can do in terms of engaging with parliamentarians. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to switch off the PowerPoint. I'm going to look at the internet with you. Okay, so you should now be able to see the Parliament homepage. So this is www.parliament.uk, and I guess if there's one thing, very important piece of information about engaging with Parliament I want you to take away from this session, it's knowing not just how you can find out who your MP is, but some crucial information about your MP that can help you when you're communicating with them. So to do that, you go to this page, you scroll down to the bottom and you will see members of the House of Commons. Enter your postcode to find the name and details of your local MP. So I'm going to do that now. This is my postcode. I click on find. Then you can see that my MP is Chukwuemeka. I live in the Streatham constituency, so do be aware that your constituency is different from your ward or your local council authority. They're not the same thing. So I live in Lambeth, which is my local authority, but my MP is Chukwuemeka for the constituency of Streatham. Immediately, you have lots of information about your MP, their address in the House of Commons, their email address in the House of Commons, their telephone number, and that's the number for their Westminster office. Now, in fact, that is our switchboard number. But if you say, I want to speak to Chukwuemeka's office, they'll put you straight through. This is the phone number of his constituency office. He's on the internet, he's got his own website. Every MP now has their own website. You can also follow him on Twitter. That's his Twitter handle there. You can also find out about what other things he's been doing. So at the moment, he's been an MP for Streatham since 2010. He's been a shadow minister. That means he's been in the shadow cabinet before. And that is a group of MPs in the opposition who shadow the main government departments. He's also sat on different select committees, and he's currently, most recently, been on the Home Affairs Committee. And here is a list of his political interests. Now, this is really important. If you want to contact your MP, you may well want to raise your issue or frame your issue in terms of the interest that they've listed. You can also find out what your MP's been up to. So here's some links to the most recent written questions he's asked. A lot of them are to do with the EU, and if you see my MP on television, he's talking a lot about the EU and wanting Britain to stay in the single market and the customs union. You can find out what he's spoken about by clicking on spoken material. And look at this, it's lots and lots of questions to do with Europe, free trade, the European Union. This is something that's very interesting to him, but there's also contribution on the debate on rail franchising. Now this is very interesting to me because Chuka and I sometimes catch the same train to work. And one of the things that concerns him and me, although we've never discussed it personally, is the service provided by Southern Rail. So as you can imagine, if any of you live in London and have experienced Southern Rail, he gets lots of comments, emails, letters from his constituents about that. So he often does talk about that as a subject. And he's here talking in the debate about harassment in public life as well. He's an MP, he's on Twitter. Quite a lot of MPs do face lots of barracking and insults on Twitter, and that's become a cause for concern, not just for MPs, but for a lot of different people. If you click on any of these links, it takes you through to Hansard, which I mentioned earlier. And there is his contribution in that debate about rail franchising. Now, Hansard can be accessed in a number of ways. You can go to it directly through the Parliament homepage, or you can look at what your own MP has said by going into Hansard this way. And as you can see, it is a written account of everything that every MP says. So every time your MP speaks in the House of Commons, it is written down and put online through Hansard. And so if you see your MP speaking in the House of Commons, it'll be online within 3 hours. So I'm just going to go back. One last thing, if you click onto your MP's website, now this is not part of the Parliament website, so we're now going away from the Parliament website. There we go. So if we go hovering over how Chuka can help, there's a link to advice surgeries. Now each MP runs surgeries, and they will run these in different ways. So this is not standardised. So Chuka runs telephone surgeries on a Monday and a Tuesday, and they will probably be with his caseworkers. And then there's a live caseworker surgery on a Wednesday, so you can go and see one of his team. You have to make an appointment to do that. There's another telephone surgery on Thursday, and then if you want to see Chuka in person, he runs a surgery every Friday from 2 till 4, and again, you have to make an appointment. Now, once upon a time, a lot of these MPs would just have, I'm going to be at such and such a venue, and just turn up. That has changed a little bit, very sadly, since the death of Joe Cox. So they're not trying to be obtrusive, they just do have to have an eye to security. But that does not mean you would not be able to see your MP. It just means you need to contact them first to let them know you're coming. So you can speak directly to your MP in person, or you can speak from their caseworkers. Different MPs run this in different ways. All I would say to you is contacting their caseworker is not second best. The caseworkers are very, very useful people to know, and they are people who've got the ear of the MP and can advise them very closely. So don't feel that you have to see the MP in person if you can't make it on that particular time. So those are some of the key points about what you can find out about your own MP just by looking at the Parliament website. And that should always be your starting point. Start by contacting your own MP. Even if you think my MP is not interested in what I have to say, my MP doesn't agree with me, my MP is a member of the government and then they can't disagree with the government in public, none of those things matter. You should always contact your own MP. A, because you might be surprised. The MP might actually say something that you weren't expecting them to say. B, because they need to know what their constituents think. So they may well be a government minister representing a particular policy, but they will be feeding back what they're hearing from their constituents to fellow ministers. And if something they're doing is very unpopular, then they'll have to think twice about that. And C, you may end up working with other members of the House of Lords, so you need to make sure that you've told your own MP first. That's just a matter of kind of, if you like, etiquette. Other MPs, if you talk to them, will say to them, have you spoken to your own MP? They don't want to be seen to be muscling in or elbowing in on another MP's work without checking. So I'm now just going to stop the share for a moment, and then I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint to look at some of the other things that you can do. So one of the most obvious things an MP can do is ask a question for you, and there's various different ways in which MPs can ask questions. All the questions are addressed directly to the government ministers responsible. So let's say you had contacted your MP about the local train service. They can ask the question then directly to the Transport Secretary and his team. Members of the House of Lords can do this, and it's a very important way that they can hold the Commons and the Lords out. How MPs and Lords can hold the government to account. Questions can be asked in person, orally. So in the picture you can see Theresa May at Prime Minister's questions. Every government department has a different question time where MPs can ask questions of the relevant ministers. Questions can be asked in writing. If it's information, statistics, data that you're after, then an MP can write directly to a government department and get that information very quickly. There's nothing to stop you writing directly to the Prime Minister or a government department, but you're very likely to just get a stock answer if you get an answer at all. If an MP writes, they must get a response, and that response must answer the question directly. As I say, there are different ministerial question times each day in the Commons. In the House of Lords, they will have general questions every day. So any member of the Lords can ask a question to any government department on any day. You'll see the heading there, Parliamentary Debates. So there is a variety of different kinds of debate in the House of Commons. I want to spend most of my time just now talking about Westminster Hall debates. Westminster Hall is a small chamber off the main House of Commons chamber. And on Mondays to Thursdays, there are general debates in Westminster Hall on a variety of different issues. Now, these debates aren't voted on, but that doesn't mean that they're not useful. You can ask your own MP to ask for a debate in Westminster Hall. There are other ways to create debates in Westminster Hall, which I'll mention later. And at the end of that debate, a minister has to respond in full to all the points raised. So you've probably seen MPs asking questions in the House of Commons, and sometimes the answers to the questions are not perhaps everything that we might wish for. In a debate, the responses are going to be fuller, more detailed, and more involved. And very often it's in these Westminster Hall debates that changes happen. Ministers hear the stories and the accounts from affected groups and have conversations with those groups, with people in those communities, to change laws or to change policies to make life better for people. They're not the kind of debates that are going to change the overall direction of travel of the government. So if you're trying to stop Brexit or you want to reverse austerity, you're not really going to do that through a Westminster Hall debate. But there are very specific goals that groups often have where those debates can be immensely useful. There are also debates in the main House of Commons chamber. You've probably seen some of those very famous debates. So it's very common now, if the government wants to commit military forces into a particular area, that there'll be a large debate in the House of Commons about the wisdom of that. You'll probably remember the debates we've had, various debates about action in Syria, action in Libya. And although it's not binding on the government for a vote in the House of Commons to take place before military action, it has now become a convention. And there are also debates about all sorts of other issues. So the recent Grenfell Tower fire, for instance, where lots of MPs were contacted by concerned constituents and of course by those affected. And it was a very important issue that had implications for other people in other parts of the country. Backbench Business Committee debates, I'm not going to say a lot about those. It's a mechanism that allows individual MPs to make sure issues get debated in the Commons. The opposition have days where they choose what's going to be debated. So if the government would rather not talk about something, the opposition can raise it through their mechanism. And the opposition gets about 20 days where they can raise those subjects. Sometimes the government will decide it's time for a debate on a particular issue. The House of Lords has debates, and just as in the Commons, individual members can ask for a debate, but unlike they don't use Westminster Hall, in the House of Lords, if an individual member wants to debate, it's called a question for short debate. It's the same thing. A member or several members will speak, somebody will speak on behalf of the government and respond in detail, and there's no vote taken at the end. You can get involved in the process of lawmaking. So Parliament makes and changes laws. Now, there's a lot to say about this, and in fact, it could take almost up to an hour to go through the whole process of how a bill becomes law. I'm not going to do that today. Just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that bills can start in the Lords or the Commons, that every bill has to go through all the stages you see on the screen, and that you can contact your own MP to raise concerns about a bill that's going through Parliament. You can contact members of the House of Lords to do the same thing. And you can also talk to members of the House of Commons or members of the House of Lords about how a bill might be changed, because MPs and members of the House of Lords can suggest amendments or changes to bills. Now, at the moment, do remember what I said, the government don't have a majority in the Lords or the Commons. So changes to laws are a very realistic proposition at the moment, and it is the Parliament that decides what's in the laws, not the government. So the government can put a bill before Parliament, but if Parliament votes that they want to change that bill, and the government can't get enough numbers to reverse that change, that is how that law will be made. So it's a very important feature of Parliament at the moment that we're really seeing sharper than ever. It's Parliament that makes those decisions. Select committees are a really important way you can get involved with the work of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. These check the policy and work of government, and the crucial point here is that they use evidence submitted by the public, groups and individuals. So these inquiries rely on the information that the public can provide. The government has to respond to the recommendations made by select committees. In the House of Commons, there's usually 11 MPs, 5 Conservative, 5 Labour and 1 member of the other parties. The party divide in select committees is not that important. The members work collaboratively. They are backbench MPs. There are no government ministers or whips on these committees, and they know they're more powerful if they work together. The chairs are elected by other MPs, which means that, again, they can be more independent. So the Health Committee, for instance, the chair of the Health Committee is a Conservative MP called Sarah Wollaston. She's been elected to be that chair by MPs from across the House because they know, A, that she's been a GP, and B, that she's not afraid to criticise the government if she feels it's necessary. And that's really important for a select committee chair. So they have already now restarted. All the select committees are now up and running. If you want to find out more about the select committees, you can do so on the website, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. If you want to find out more information about Parliament, you can always call or email the House of Commons Inquiry Service or the Lords Inquiry Service. Now, the phone numbers you see on the screen are operative during office hours. You can email anytime, and they'll usually get back to you within 24 hours. So if you're trying to find something on the website or you need some more information about what's going on, then they will provide that information to you free of charge. You can join our mailing list, and you can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, and that can be done at the link below. Now, what I'll do is I'll give Francis these slides, so if anybody wants them, we can circulate them, but obviously this is also being recorded, so you can come back and have a look at it. So before I finish speaking, I just wanted to show you a couple of other things on the website, and then we'll take some questions. So going back to the Parliament webpage, here it is. So the first thing I said I'd mention to you was select committees. So if you click on this link here, committees, you'll see all the committees are listed. You will see there's the latest news from ongoing inquiries. These are the different inquiries that are going on. And you can again see all the Common Select Committees and the Lord Select Committee. So let's have a look at what inquiries are currently running. Quite a few different ones that are currently running. And here on this side, we've got a page that just gives us ones that are at the moment looking for evidence. So these are the ones that are actively seeking contributions from the public at the moment. So as you can see, there's still quite a lot, and all sorts of different subjects. So some of them are very specific. So this one, algorithms and decision making. So that's looking for very specialist knowledge. But some of them are looking for much broader knowledge. So there's one on childcare, for instance, e-cigarettes and the use of e-cigarettes, one on fake news. So some of them are very specific, land value capture. Some of them will be looking for very individual contributions, like the private rented sector. They're going to want to hear from tenants within the private rented sector about their experiences. In fact, let's have a look at that inquiry right now. So this is an inquiry looking at the role of local authorities in the private rented sector and the focus on the provision by councils of private rented accommodation. Experience of rogue landlords. So if you've recently been affected by a rogue landlord and you've sought support from the local authority, then they want to hear from you. So they're actually looking for individual details on that inquiry. And they've set up a web forum where you can give evidence of your experiences, and here it is. So different select committees will run in different ways, but you can sign up for email alerts from select committees. You can go to the page that we've just been looking at, or you can follow them on Twitter. And do just to reinforce it one more time, be aware that they are very often looking for evidence directly from the public. This evidence is vital to select committees because they base their reports on the evidence they find. So your voice not only is vital to the committee, but could be a really important factor in getting the government to think about the recommendations of that committee. Don't underestimate the power of those personal stories when getting government ministers to think about the impact of their policy. And the last thing I wanted to look at, because Francis asked me to look at it with you, is all-party parliamentary groups. Now, these are not accessible through the main Parliament website. They are on a separate page. But the quickest way I find is just to Google all-party parliamentary groups. And there is a register here of all-party parliamentary groups. And you'll immediately see a very long list of countries. There are lots of different all-party groups to do with countries. But what's probably of more interest to you are the ones on different subjects. Now, Francis, I know, has got something to say about a group that he's worked with. But one of the ones I've worked quite closely with is one on young people in care and leaving care. So this is a group on looked after children and care leavers. Now, if I just scroll down for a second, you'll see that it says Secretariat Become acts as the group's secretariat. So there's a charity that provides staff. This is really important. All party parliamentary groups are not part of the official business of Parliament. And in order to work, they usually need support from an outside organisation, like a charity or a federation or a network of some kind. Once they've been set up, however, they're a really valuable way to engage with parliamentarians. And those parliamentarians come together because they take a specific interest in the subject. So here we can see we've got a Labour MP is the chair, we've got a co-chair as a Conservative, another co-chair as a member of the House of Lords. Now, Become, I've done quite a lot of work with Become, and what they do is they get young people who are in care and leaving care to come along to these meetings, to meet the parliamentarians, to talk about their experiences, and then those parliamentarians can then take those experiences forward into debates and into questions. And one key change, so Francis asked me to give you some examples that's come about through this group, was a couple of years ago, by talking to the members of this group, young people were able to talk about, there was a bit of a postcode lottery in terms of the grants they were receiving from councils when they left care. And some young people were getting enough money to set themselves up in a rented accommodation and get an address and get a job. Some young people were not getting anywhere enough support, and it really depended on where you lived. So by talking to parliamentarians through this group, they were able to get the government to set in stone a minimum amount that young people had to receive when they left care, and that is now being enforced across all local authorities. So not a massive headline grabbing story, but obviously for those young people in care, you know, the difference between finding somewhere to live when leaving care or waiting months, sofa surfing, unsure of their futures. So a big deal for them.
Thanks for doing that, Alasdair. That was pretty comprehensive. And I know that you can go on because you do your presentations for a lot longer because
Yes.
It's a very detailed and complicated topic. Perry, by the way, asked about e-petitions. And you were
Yes, I was going to mention that.
So we could take that out because he wants to know, is there any example of an e-petition being successful?
Yeah, so I've got a very good example of that happening right now. Although it's in a journey, it hasn't actually sort of reached the end of the road yet. But let me just share the screen briefly with you again. So this is the e-petitions site here. So just to give you a very quick background, anybody can start an e-petition. You don't have to be over 18 to start a petition. You only need, I think it's 5 signatures to get it started. The Petitions Committee staff will make sure that it's sort of in order and that it's something that the government might be asked to do something about. So these are some of the most recent ones we've got. Parliament's vote on the Brexit deal must include an option to remain in the EU, plus passes for over 60s, abolish the GDP target for foreign aid. A petition that I've been quite involved with recently is this one. So in terms of what petitions are successful, this is quite an interesting one because it's still kind of on its journey. This is about making a drug available in the NHS for people with cystic fibrosis, and that drug is called Orkambi. So here's the petition. It's got 112,000 plus signatures. So that means Parliament are going to debate the petition. So it's successful in that regard. It's going to have a debate on the 19th of March. Underneath is a government response. Now, the government will respond as soon as the petition reaches 10,000 signatures. Obviously, this petition has yet to be successful in terms of changing government policy. But we have had 2 petitions that have done that. One petition was about treatment for people with brain tumours. That petition, in fact, did not reach 100,000 signatures, but the Petitions Committee looked at it and said, okay, this has not been debated in the House of Commons for 10 years, so we're going to have a debate about it. The debate was extremely well attended. And as a result of that debate, the government actually did change their policy on looking at how brain tumours were dealt with. They've created a working group to look at brain tumour treatment within the NHS, and one of the petitioners is a layperson on that group. So that was a big change in a very specific area. One of the other changes that came about through the petition, and you may remember this got some coverage on the news, was a woman was sent home from work because she wasn't wearing high-heeled shoes, and a petition was started up about that. A small inquiry took place into dress codes in the workplace, and it was actually discovered that what that company had done was illegal, but the government were not issuing proper guidelines and guidance to companies about dress codes. So the government actually reformulated that policy and made private companies aware of what the rules were on dress codes and the fact that what that particular company had done was illegal. So those are two specific changes that have come about through petitions. Again, I'd say, rather like with Westminster Hall debates, petitions are not particularly good if you're trying to do big macro changes to government policy. But those specific issues, I think they can be hugely effective.
Alasdair, we've had two questions from David Newman, and I'll put them to you together because they're both about the use of technology to improve engagements with Parliament. David says, first of all, that the Irish Parliament back in 2006 ran an e-consultation on the heads of agreement of their broadcasting bill. And David asks, when is the House of Commons going to catch up? And the second question, an example from a bit further afield, Chile has a virtual Senate in which any citizen can go online and discuss the issues currently before the senators. And he says, when is the House of Lords going to catch up with Chile?
Okay, so the first question, actually lots of committees have tried and still are doing experiments like that. So you would have just seen just now, when we looked at the inquiry about the private rented sector, there was that web forum that had been set up by the committee. And that web forum would be not just simply a way for people to sort of vent their spleen, but it would be to give specific examples of the treatment they'd received that members could then use in their questioning of ministers, and that could also be put into the report, which made recommendations to government. So the House of Commons and the House of Lords have both used a variety of online methods to take evidence. We are a little bit behind some authorities and parliaments. We're currently looking very closely at what the National Assembly for Wales have been doing for about 7 or 8 years, where they've been taking video evidence for select committees. They've been doing all sorts of innovative things. So we are looking at that, we are working on that. And there was actually a Speaker's Commission on e-democracy a couple of years ago that made some very wide-ranging recommendations for the whole House, which are now being kind of looked at, rolled out systematically in lots of different ways. The other question about the virtual chamber is that we do actually have something like that in the House of Lords. It's not quite as, it doesn't sound quite as comprehensive as the one in Chile, but there is a sort of an online, I can't remember what it's called, if it's called a virtual chamber, but basically as the House of Lords debates are going on, there's the opportunity for the public to sort of add comments. I think one of the reasons Parliament's kind of shied away from going the whole hog with that is that what it wants to try and do is encourage citizens to engage with the members and then get the members to raise those issues on their behalf. So one of the things we've done through our outreach team is hold things called digital debates, where there's a debate in Westminster Hall. The week prior to that, a member who leads the debate will go online and will take lots of comments, suggestions, ideas from the public who are affected by that issue, and then they will then raise those during the debate for a ministerial response. So that's sort of the line we've taken up until now, but we're always up for suggestions, we're always up for new ideas about how we can engage and sort of make online engagement particularly more accessible. And Francis came to me with this suggestion, for instance, and we picked up and run with it.
Okay, and you talked about select committees and how important they can be, and you showed the sort of things they're investigating and then their requests for evidence from the general public. Evan Parker, who's on here and has a passion for education, is saying, can I suggest to a select committee that they investigate a certain subject, not just the detail, but the subject itself?
Yes, is the answer to that question. And there's several ways you can do that. You can contact the staff of a select committee directly, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. They are very happy to take suggestions and recommendations for inquiries. The decision on what a select committee will look at is taken by the members of that committee and the chair. You can write or email the chair in their capacity as chair. So even if they're not your MP, that doesn't matter. Or you can communicate with one of the MPs on that select committee directly, or you can talk to your own MP and say, you know, I want to get a message through to your colleague who works on the education committee to make a recommendation. Now, as it happens, the Communities and Local Government Committee a few years ago did an inquiry into some park homes. I don't know if anyone's come across these static caravans that people live in as houses. And a woman had had a very bad experience in one of these park homes. She went to her MP and talked about it. That got discussed at the select committee and it got taken up as a subject for inquiry, and actually ended up in a very wide-ranging inquiry, which made some quite big changes to the way those park homes were run. So suggestions, ideas, problems that individual people have experienced definitely can be taken up by select committees. And if you bear with me, I'll show you. Here it is, Communities and Local Government Committee. And this is the inquiries they've got going on at the moment. But if you want to contact them, if you go down this side here, you'll see there's a link, Contact Us. And you can actually talk directly to the staff who work on that committee. Just to give you an idea of who's who, the clerk and the second clerk are the staff in charge of that committee. And these people, these committee specialists, these are the people who run the actual inquiries. So if you wanted to suggest an inquiry, you might want to talk to the clerks. If you wanted to get some more information about a specific inquiry, you might want to talk to the specialists. If you want to find out who the MPs are on a committee, then you can click on membership. And there you can see all the different MPs. If you really, want to maximise your chance of the subject being taken up, the chair is probably the best person to talk to, because the chair will have the final say on what inquiries are taken.
Terry?
Mike Bradley has asked a question which actually was very much buzzing around in my own mind while you were talking, Alasdair. And Mike asks, is there any community outreach programme which ensures that school pupils know this sort of information before they are able to vote? And the reason that question was buzzing around in my own mind, Mike, was because I think I learned quite a bit this morning, things that I didn't know, and I was taught none of this at school.
Right.
And so have things improved since I was at school?
I think the answer is yes and no. No, because it is still not part of the national curriculum to teach young people about Parliament, which is very frustrating for us, and we would like that to be the case. I would say yes, because we have a very vibrant and hardworking education service. I'm now part of that. We've merged my team with the education service. We're now an education and engagement service. The education service works with school children in two ways. So we have an education centre here in Parliament, and their mission is to bring as many schools to Parliament as possible, not just for a tour of the building, but to actually carry out workshops that are based on the skill level of those young people, so corresponding to the key stage that they're in, to teach them about the importance of voting, the importance of democracy in Parliament. And then we also have an outreach team, which I'm now part of, which works with schools as well as community groups. So they go out to schools who may be finding it difficult to travel down to Westminster, or it may be hard for those students to reach Westminster. We do have a travel bursary scheme. So if money is an issue for people coming down, we will pay travel costs. But of course, there's all sorts of other reasons why a school might not be able to come to Westminster. So we have staff who can go to them. So we have quite a comprehensive service now, and our aim is to reach every school child before they leave school, to help them understand the relevance and importance of Parliament.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, Evan's asked a really, really big question. I mean, you talked about select committees and the fact that they deal with education and international development and so on. And he says that, how do we get a debate going on? How do we do politics? How can we do it better? And maybe, I mean, you can respond to this, Alasdair, but maybe, I mean, the select committee doesn't exist for that, but maybe the way to do that is to try and get an all-party parliamentary group together to talk about how we can do politics better. The one that we were involved in was a group of people who wanted to do that, really. They said, how do we look at future things when parliaments change every 5 years and there's chopping and changing? How do we get to look at the future and have long-term policy? And they wrote to MPs. They came to one of our meetings, and the MP who addressed our meeting, they got him involved. So they've now got an APPG together to discuss how we do politics better in the future. So would your advice to Evan to go down that route, or is there any other way?
I think the APPG is a really good idea. I think we're in a really interesting time at the moment. MPs are discovering, because it's a hung parliament, they've got a bit more power, and that backbenchers, if they work together, can actually get changes made through Parliament, which is really fascinating. It's something I've sort of seen grow over the last 5 or 6 years, but it's really coming into its own now that you're getting backbenchers from different parties talking to each other outside their leaderships and saying, well, let's push for this. So restoration and renewal, you will see the vote that took place on that. The government wanted to delay that further, but backbenchers from both the main parties were, no, we don't want to delay this, we want to get on with it. And that's how the vote shook out. And I think they're beginning to discover that they've got that power, not just to work collaboratively, but to look perhaps more long-term on some of the long-term questions. And the APPG is a really good way to facilitate that. We don't have a committee that specifically looks at constitutional reform. We used to, and sadly it was wound up. But there is a committee called, I'm going to try and remember what it's called now, it's the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. So if you're interested in some of those questions, I would recommend following them on Twitter or getting email alerts. Their brief is quite broad. So they were the committee that carried out the inquiry into the kids company fiasco, for instance. But they also do look at sort of questions to do with voting systems, how Parliament works, how democracy works. So that's something definitely to keep an eye on if you're interested in those subjects. But I think as a forum for getting MPs to think about those questions, APPG is a good way. I'll just sound a note of warning. There has recently been an attempt to get a cross-party forum going to look at the future of the NHS, and it hasn't come together. And one of the reasons for that is that political parties sometimes shy away from those kind of cross-party cooperative bodies because they're worried that it's going to tie their hands in some way if and when they reach power. So there is, if you like, some institutional reluctance to do that sometimes. But on some questions, constitutional questions, maybe backbenchers are a little bit more open to it than they used to be.
Okay, I mean, before I go over to you, Terry, Peter Hughes has sort of asked a big question like that as well. And I guess the answer to his question, and we won't go into it because it is a macro question again, but I guess an APPG would be the right way to go for that as well. Anyhow, Terry, over to you.
We have another question from Mike Bradley, and it's again, I think, about how we might use technology to improve engagement. And Mike asks if there's any plan to provide MPs with an effective way to gauge the feelings of their constituents about certain specific current issues, for example, via a mobile app. And he says that currently the main way is by writing or phone, and yet that's no longer the way most people interact with each other.
Yeah, there's nothing specific. And I think that's an interesting question because it really does kind of touch on the nature of representative democracy versus direct democracy. So, for instance, you could conceive of an app where every time an MP went to vote, his or her constituents clicked a button to say which way they thought they should vote. Now, in our system as it's currently constituted, the MP would not have to abide by that. The MP would be able to say, well, I'm your representative and I'm deciding I'm going to vote in this particular way. Having said that, I think there are quite a lot of ways you can engage with your MP now outside of phone calls and emails. A lot of MPs are on Twitter now, and very often if you've quick questions or quick things you want to suggest to an MP, you can tweet at them. I think MPs use other kinds of social media as well. Some MPs I know during the vote on Syria sort of went out of their way to provide public forums and other forums in which people kind of make their views known. Personally, I think what I would say is whilst I'm all for using technology to engage more and get to people through their mobile phones, through their tablets, you can't really beat writing to your MP. It doesn't have to be with pen and paper. An email is fine. But I know from experience from talking to MPs that something that's written to them shows them that it's an issue that matters to you. And I think that they are a little bit wary of systems where it's, you know, what you might crudely call collectivism, where, you know, someone just clicks on a button and then that says, right, I want you to vote this way. Now, maybe there's a bigger debate to go on in the future about whether we want to continue with that kind of democracy, whether we want to continue with systems where MPs are representatives and have the final say. But that's the system we've got right now. And I think if you want to get involved in engaging in that system, then communicating with your MP in a personal way, whether it's through an email or face-to-face, is a really effective method. And I would be sad to see it sort of disappear.
Okay. Perry, actually, one of the first questions he asked was about Westminster Hall debates.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Westminster Hall debates is something very often we don't think about too much. And if we watch it on television, we usually watch the floor of the House of Commons. We don't watch Westminster Hall debates.
Right.
I mean, when did they get started, he was asking. And I suppose the other question that goes with it is, do they have an influence? I mean, they give a chance for MPs to go into things in detail, to talk in a cross-party way, and to get onto the floor more often than they would in the House. So for an MP, I can see an opportunity. But for the citizen, the general public, how do they relate to that so it's effective?
So I think the answer to that question is embedded in the question. It's easier for backbench MPs to get a subject debated because of Westminster Hall. So prior to Westminster Hall, in its current form, kicked off in about 2001, if you were an MP and you wanted to debate on something to do with your constituency or something that was close to your heart or your constituents' heart, you had to apply for an adjournment debate. Now, these still happen, and they happen at the end of every day in the House of Commons. But the maximum of those you're going to get a week is 5. So at the end of every day, if the House doesn't sit on Friday, then there's only going to be 4. So Westminster Hall immediately opened up about 15 to 20 more slots for those debates. So that's the most important thing. You can ask your MP to apply for a Westminster Hall debate. The petitions, which get more than 100,000 signatures, those will be Westminster Hall debates. What is their impact? What's their efficacy? That's a really good question. And I think for a lot of people, they will look at them and go, well, there's no vote here. It's not making the government do anything. What's the point? My experience is, if it's on a very specific question, what you're doing is dragging the government's attention onto that question and making them look at it in a way that maybe they hadn't looked at it before. So if you're in a government department, you've got a certain set of responsibilities. There's certain things you're going to have to do day to day and just get on with it. But in a Westminster Hall debate, suddenly you're being asked to zoom in on a specific area of your policy in detail. So in the run-up to Westminster Hall debate, a minister will sit down with their civil servants, they'll get a full briefing on that subject, and so they can respond in detail during the debate. And of course, by doing that, they've had to think about your policy area, usually for a few hours. They may find out there are gaps in government policy in that area. They may find out there's issues they hadn't considered. We've certainly had situations where ministers have been in a Westminster Hall debate and have been visibly moved, shaken. We've even had ministers in tears in Westminster Hall debates, hearing stories about things that they just had no knowledge of before. And I think that's one of the things for me that's most powerful about those debates, is when people say about government ministers that they're out of touch and they're not listening. There's some truth in that. But, you know, Westminster Hall debates, those kind of debates are a way you can actually make them listen, make them hear. And sometimes it does produce results where ministers will sit down with those groups affected and discuss further with them what needs to be done. So as a method of changing government policy by vote, they're not effective. As a means of getting government to think again about their policy and get a dialogue going, they're very effective.
Okay, and how far ahead, Perry asks, are the debates scheduled, Westminster Hall debates?
Usually about a fortnight. So if you go onto the Parliament website, there's a calendar which shows you what's coming up over the next 2 weeks, and it will show you which debates are coming up over the next fortnight.
Okay, well, let's take the last question. Over to you, Terry.
There's a question from David Newman. You've talked a lot, Alasdair, about different ways in which citizens can get engaged with Parliament. But David asks if you know of any published evaluations or studies of citizen engagement with Parliament.
Yeah, there's one. So the Hansard Society, which has nothing to do with Hansard in the House of Commons or the House of Lords, produce every year an audit of public engagement, and that's available through their website. And we've also got, and I'll send the link to Francis, the House of Commons Library have done an extremely good briefing report on who is disengaged, and we use that document as the basis of our targeting. So when we think about the audiences that we're trying to talk to on a regular basis, we use the data and the findings of that report. It probably won't surprise anybody. What it looks at is average rates of political engagement and who falls below the average. Women tend to be less likely to vote and engage than men. BAME communities tend to be less engaged, people with disabilities. But the full details are in that document, and it's like all the documents the library produces, it's very readable, You don't have to be an expert to follow it. And we found that to be immensely useful, as well as the annual work that the Hansard Society do.
Okay, well, let's come to an end now, because we've come to the end of the hour. And just to thank you, Alasdair, for doing that, because that was pretty extensive. You answered the questions very directly. And I mean, a lot of us think we know a lot about Parliament, but we don't know everything. And you filled in lots of gaps, and that's been really, really important. And in fact, Mike Bradley says we should do webinars like this to actually work with schools and universities to actually get them to know a lot more. Because
Yes.
I think once we've got this webinar recorded, I think people will go back to it when they want to research how they contact select committees, APPGs and MPs. So it's been incredibly useful and important. As I say, this is recorded and it will go up as a YouTube video, so it will be available for reference again and for dissemination. So thank you very much, Alasdair, for doing this.
Pleasure, real pleasure. Thank you, Francis, for arranging.
It's been really great. And thank you, Terry, for helping with the questions. What you did was really, really great as well. And thank you, everyone, for the questions you asked. I mean, they're still coming up now, so we can't go through them all. But thank you. And it's been a great webinar.